I really enjoyed the day. I wasn't able to attend all the presentations, but I did hear enough to convince me that Purdue is a leader in cyber infrastructure, and I'm very happy about that. The title of my talk this evening is Global Dimensions of Cyber Infrastructure, Compete or Collaborate. And I think the title will become more evident as I get into my talk. I want to start first by indicating why I think cyber infrastructure is important in terms of the conduct of science, how it's revolutionizing science. I want to then talk about the history of the development of CI support in the National Science Foundation. 6 years ago when I came into the foundation, NSF was far from being a leader in provisioning cyber infrastructure. Today, I think almost everyone would agree that we're a world leader in the field. But that didn't happen easily, and so I want to touch on some of those points. And then later in the talk, I'm going to take a more global perspective and look a little bit toward the future. So how did we get started? Incidentally, Dr. Richard Bukaias was here earlier. He was part of this history as a director of the engineering directorate, and he provided leadership at NSF and getting the offices and the directors integrated in supporting cyber infrastructure through supportive research that required cyber infrastructure. So much for that. To start with, the National Science Foundation, early in the new millennium, around 2000, convened a Blue Ribbon panel, which was headed up by Dr. Dan Atkins from the University of Michigan, to examine what role NSF should play in advancing U.S. leadership in cyber infrastructure. The panel came out with a number of recommendations, but probably the most striking was that the NSF budget for cyber infrastructure should increase to $1 billion per year. And it should be substantially expanded in terms of scale and scope. Well, you know, $1 billion is a lot of money in Washington. It gets a lot of attention. But I've done a mental calculation, and today NSF is investing more than $1 billion a year in cyber infrastructure if you look at it comprehensively. So at least in that regard, we have met the recommendation of the Blue Ribbon panel. Now, when I talk about comprehensive in support, you would be able to know what I'm talking about. It includes high-end computing at both teraflop and petaflop scales. And I served on a panel for the National Science Foundation back in the early 1980s, and at that time, the big national challenge was to get to 1 teraflop. And the question was, should we do that with one big machine, or should we do it with a distributed network? And the wisdom at that time was to do it in a distributed network. And then that led eventually to the development of the the computing centers and the PACI centers and so forth. But in addition to heavy metal on the floor, it also touched on software tools for high-end ubiquitous computing, connection, interface, and visualization services, open data, information and knowledge management services, networking at global, national, regional, local, and campus levels, the means for establishing virtual organizations, observatories, and a term that was then coined, collaboratories, with open, free-to-access environments, and also cyber infrastructure for learning environments to educate students at all levels, as well as the future CI workforce. Now, all those things are necessary, but as I'll touch on later in my remarks, they're far from being sufficient. There's still gaps missing. So the panel members at that time also identified a number of issues that they felt were important for the foundation to pay attention to. Number one, even though the TeraGrid was an important tool for high-end practitioners at that time, it lacked the middleware, the connectivity to make it readily accessible to all users. and to accommodate the needs of virtual communities and to facilitate interoperability with global networks. That's since been fixed. Secondly, while the PACI centers have provided the STEM community access to high-end computational capabilities and expert technical support staff, equally important, the centers seem to be locked in for grant renewals. The National Science Board was very much concerned about that, and they felt that the lack of competition was denying other capable universities from developing top-end capabilities. Since STEM research was continually expanding among institutions of higher learning to include four-year educational institutions and predominantly minority-serving institutions, it was important to consider provisioning both wired and wireless CI connectivity to the TerraGrid for this broader community. But there were also organizational barriers within the foundation. There were three components of what it would take to have an integrated program, namely supporting the research into advanced CI science and technology, which is a traditional responsibility of the SCI's Directorate, Computer and Information Science and Engineering, exploring innovative applications of CI to solve complex problems, which is the role of the directorates and the research offices, and providing advanced CI capabilities and services to a broader STEM community, which would be a provisioning organization, which would be a CI office in its own right. Furthermore, there was a need for NSF to pay closer attention to other issues, such as giving earlier attention to software tools before deploying the next big thing in computing hardware. Software always tends to be an orphan when it comes to building the next capability, the next generation of machines. Integrating CI in the conceptual design stage of major instrumentation and facility developments, rather than retrofitting it in after the facility is built. Addressing the social dimensions of establishing virtual networks, developing protocols for openly sharing data and knowledge, and developing standards and operating procedures for the interoperability of national and global networks. All those are procedural issues that are totally important if you're going to have an integrated worldwide capability. Applying CI tools to enable digital libraries to organize, curate, archive, and openly distribute data, information, e-documents, and courseware on the internet, and to convert dark archives, or what we used to call data mortuaries, into light archives where data can see the light of day. And developing collaborations with other federal agencies and global partners to find synergies in financing and using CI to find answers to grand challenge global problems. Well, that's a pretty tall order. So that was back in 2003. When I came to the NSF in early part of 2004, and had been there for only about 6 months, it became clear to me that we had a lot of work to do. And we had to change the organizational structure, we had to overcome interface barriers within the foundation, and also to build much larger budgets to address the new CI vision and to step up to a national leadership role that the panel had called for. And that meant more than a doubling of the budget for CI. So we took a number of steps, and we had the willing participation of the entire NSF organization to include the senior leadership, the program directors, and the administrative and technical staffs. And it took a total involvement to make it happen. So the first step was to develop an agency-wide vision document. Many of you have seen this vision document. It's on the website, that would reflect the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Panel, but also the results from other reports and workshops that had also been contemporary at the time. Dr. Debbie Crawford, now provost at Drexel University, led a working group in developing the initial vision of the document and improving it over several months due to, as a result of comments from the community at large. Debbie was our go-to person in the foundation when difficult problems had to be dealt with, and especially if it involved people. She was a master team builder, and she amazes me. She accomplished amazing things during that time. Second, it was necessary in order to build a larger budget to give greater visibility to a CI provisioning organization. And at that time, that organization was buried in the size directorate. It was a division. And there were two problems with that, and that is that the other ADs and ODs felt that there was sort of an incestuous relationship between the research part of the mission and the provisioning part of the mission. And secondly, there was no way we were going to build the budget as it was needed if it were buried within a directorate. It would have to come up and be an office within the office of the director and have full visibility and transparency as well as credibility to the major decision makers. So the Office of Cyber Infrastructure was born with a charge to become more interactive, strategic, visible, and transparent. Thirdly, it was essential that a governance structure be established for which the directorate and office leaders would be the internal stakeholders, in fact, of NSF's total CI enterprise. So this led to the establishment of a CI council, which had all the ADs and the ODs present in the council. That's sort of the senior management team. And we have senior management meetings every week. And the first item on the agenda every week was cyber infrastructure. And that still prevailed until I left just 6 months ago. Now, we also had to support the council with both an external advisory committee and an internal coordinating committee. So we then went and built a CI advisory committee. This is a FACA committee, which is the terminology for the Sunshine Act for federal agencies. And it was a committee that reported to me, the director, but it was also supported by the OCI director as a cognizant federal official. Finally, we were able to recruit Dan Atkins, who was the chair of the Blue Ribbon panel, and to become the first inaugural director of the Office of Cyber Infrastructure. So my challenge to him is, look, you caused all the ruckus, so you now have to make it work. And so he immediately set about setting strategic objectives for the OCI and incorporating them in the vision document. So if you go and read the vision document, you'll see specific goals right at the very, very beginning of the document. He also established a representative internal coordinating council, which we asked him to do. But one of his major contributions was to assist me and my deputy in selecting the nation's top experts in the CI field for ACCI. And if you look at the people that are on that committee, you'll agree that that is about the best you can do. That's our dream team. The leadership of Dan Atkins in the formative stage of OCI was pivotal. He kept the assistant directors and the office directors informed of important developments. He structured and defended the OCI program before the Office of Management and Budget Examiners and the congressional staff. He also recruited additional staff for OCI and through them built significant momentum for the program. He really rated, actually, the NSF to get the best talent we had. But it was very important to do. But there were other people involved. High accolades go to Jose Munoz and Steve Meacham for implementing a high-performance computing strategy that has now resulted in the procurement and installation of 3 petaflop-class computers. We had thought about only one, but 2 of them have come up to a petaflop since then. And the transitioning of the TerraGrid to an XGrid. We couldn't call it a TerraGrid anymore because we were already up to about 5 or 6 petaflops capacity, and so we called it XGrid. anticipating exaflop. And so the new grid has greater ease of connectivity and enhanced capabilities for data retrieval, transfer, and storage. Kudos also go to Ed Seidel, who in partnership with NSF's directorates and offices gave greater attention to investing in software and data management tools, expanding research collaborations through virtual organizations, and initiating research and education programs to advance the field of computation science and engineering. And I'm pleased to see that that's emerging here at Purdue. Very important. It also charged the ACCI, this is the External Advisory Committee, with providing new forward-looking perspectives for future NSF investments. And this was intended to fill some of the gaps that I indicated in the initial charge. Jeanette Wing was engaged with the private sector and provided access to substantial cloud computing capabilities for NSF grantees. This is a freebie, and it's all provided by industry. Of course, what they want in return are software tools, which are developed by our academic researchers. She also worked in partnership with the Directorate for Education and Human Resources and exploring new modalities for bringing CI technologies into the classroom for pre-K to 12. And I should also recognize the National Science Board. After all, they had to approve our budget for CI across the foundation. And they also issued an important and timely report on data management, which is now embedded in our program. So these actions have really gone far in achieving NSF's initial CI vision. But we didn't stop there. There were other things that were needed to be done. For example, we had to pay attention to the upscore states. These are the states that have lesser funding than the average state funding from the foundation. And we have what we call a Track 2 component, which represent infrastructure grants. And we dedicated that to cyber infrastructure so they could build out their inter-campus as well as intra-campus networks, and also to provide connectivity to the terror grid. But we also insisted, since many of these states also have a large number of tribal colleges as well as other underrepresented minorities, that they pay attention to those schools as well. We issued a number of network grants for international connectivity. A number of networks were benefited from NSF funding. For example, we helped support the Transpac 2, which connects U.S. with Japan and other parts of Asia. Gloriad, which connects U.S. with China, with Russia, and Korea. Translite Pacific Way, which connects U.S. with Australia. The REN network, which connects U.S. with Latin America, and the latest, the TAJ network, which connects Singapore, India, the Middle East, and Europe. While there's still dark regions, yet especially in sub-Saharan Africa, I predict that those two will be lighted up in the near future. So advances have been made in pursuing synergies between NSF investments and other agencies, both here in the U.S. and abroad. For example, we installed the Kraken computer at Oak Ridge National Laboratory and assigned that to the University of Tennessee, plus the University Consortium that helps manage Oak Ridge, primarily because of the synergistic relationship with the technical talent that they had at Oak Ridge, plus cheap power, and an infrastructure that made it a very good investment on our part. In addition, we're linked with the Department of Energy through their SIDAC program in our software investments. And we also initiated a competition with other G8 research councils. These are the G8 countries. And that now is in place to develop advanced application software concepts for exaflop computers, which we expect will come along in the next decade. Funding for high-end computers and associated capabilities has now been totally unbundled to enable competition for new grants for leadership computers by new participants. There are now a number of new university entrants outside of the previous PACI centers, which rank among the top 10 with computing capabilities ranging to the petaflop scale. Among these are the University of Colorado, the University of Texas at Austin, which we supported, University of Tennessee, the Kraken computer again, Georgia Tech University, and almost tied with Georgia Tech, Purdue University, which ranked fourth until a week ago, and now it ranks fifth by only about 200,000 flops. But you know, this is a dynamic situation because when Blue Waters comes online, Illinois will be number 1 and we'll slip to number 6. So NSF has now issued a new call for open access to data generated under NSF grants and now requires PIs to submit data management plans with their proposals to show how this requirement will be satisfied. This has engaged a lot of time and effort by the Purdue faculty. It's been led by Dean Mullins and Jerry McCartney. And this call responds to congressional mandates, so we have very little choice in the matter, and focuses reliance on universities to address various faculty and institutional open access issues at the data, metadata, and the e-publication levels. I might say that Congress really mandated NSF to set the ground rules. And I had a hard time convincing members of Congress and their staff that NSF is not a regulatory agency. So we're not going to mandate anything. We will ask them to submit their plans as part of their research proposals, and then we'll judge the merit of their plans as part of the merit review. So up until now, I've devoted my remarks to recounting NSF roles in addressing the various dimensions from a national perspective during my time as director of the agency. In my concluding remarks, I want to address this topic from a global perspective. As a result of growing investments by nations throughout the world in research, education, and CI, which most economists would say is driving economic development in our knowledge economy, the world is, allegorically speaking, shrinking as well as flattening. I believe that NSF, in fulfilling its CI vision, has enhanced the global competitiveness of U.S. universities. So this is the competitiveness part of it. However, in fulfilling this objective, attention has also been given to increasing investments in global collaborative research because of the need to collaborate in order to compete. So through our Office of International Science and Engineering, we increased the budget to enable more collaborative activities on a global basis. Research fundamentally, at the frontier especially, is a quest being pursued by researchers throughout the world. Two factors are of significant importance in supporting the competitive potential of U.S. researchers working at the frontier. First, other nations are increasing the intensity of their research investments relative to GDP, with the result that the U.S. world market share in research investment will continue to decrease, as it has been. Secondly, a growing fraction of the world PhD researchers will be outside of the U.S. due to greater investments by developing nations in providing graduate education for potentially a much larger student population. And you can see the investments in China and what that's bringing about, but also India is not far behind. As a result of these trends, the impacts of U.S. leadership in most fields of research will become more diluted over time. This means that an increasing fraction of new scientific concepts and breakthroughs will more likely occur outside of the U.S. in the future. CI now makes it possible for U.S. researchers to be linked virtually on a 24/7 basis with research communities throughout the world. Not to pay attention to this opportunity is to accept risk of becoming blindsided to important movements at the frontiers of science. The movement to share data openly around the world is intensifying. Modern major research facilities and observational networks will require embedded CI and backbone networks to accommodate the increased volumes of data generation, transfer, and storage. However, institutions are discovering that the more difficult barriers to achieving progress toward this goal are more social than technological in nature. While the world's societies are continually challenged by an ever-changing and interlaced world, they are also the potential beneficiaries of CI advances. Global grand challenge problems are multivariant, complex coupled systems for which the interrelationships among variables are subject to change in unpredictable ways, and the optimization of one part of the system can lead to unintended consequences in another part of the system. It is now more than ever before that high-end computing is available to help investigators understand the inherent complexities of solving these complex coupled problems. This is a challenge worthy of the emerging worldwide collaborative culture, one that is becoming ever more virtual, but also one that is ever more mindful of a basic need to compete, which is fundamentally the inherent in the scientific model. However, a word of caution is appropriate in contemplating this emerging world of open access publishing and data transfer on the internet. E-publishing overcomes the page limitations and time delays of journal publications and facilitates continuous, instantaneous publication and critique. However, the publications are less likely to be understood or useful without adequate attention to semantics, ontology, and tagging. It could be like having a free rein to the palace, but without the keys to the most interesting and important rooms. Furthermore, armed with information management tools such as AI, knowledge robots or no-bots, cloud filters, and pattern recognition algorithms, the single investigator may become the premier collaborator of the future. Collaboration in this instance would not be active collaboration with other individuals or groups, which is time-consuming and requires interpersonal and communication skills as well as team-building skills, but would rather be passive collaboration with the hunches, insights, and concepts provided by many other scientists through their e-publications and data, openly accessible. These new knowledge management and interpretation tools may become the new connective tissue of the future between collaboration and competition. The lesson here is that CI tools may be necessary but not sufficient for the future advancement of science and the information revolution. Considering the measures and countermeasures inherent in this glass bead game, and I hope you all know what I mean by glass bead game. This is a famous novel written by Hermann Hesse, which won the Nobel Prize in 1946. This glass bead game of all fields of science, and it will be very well challenged. Thank you.
Any questions of Arden? Or? Rick, thank you.
I actually don't know what glass bead game is. Wait, you never had read the novel?
Oh, the glass bead game. Okay. So the novel is about an individual by the name of Connect, which in German means servant. It's a futuristic novel that takes place in about the 25th century. And the intellectuals at that time are closeted. And they're protected from the outside world of technology and society. And their full engagement is to figure out how to synthesize all the fields of arts and sciences. And the book does not tell you what the rules of engagement are in the glass bead game, but ideally it's primarily an environment of abstract thought to advance the level of thinking over time. So it's a lifetime purpose. So the novices that come in at a very early age, and they spend their entire life engaged in this ivory tower synthesizing art and science. So you can see what the analogy is to what I was talking about in the individual collaborator. Connect later on becomes disillusioned. He does go back out into society. He's met with a number of challenges. He befriends an acolyte, and he eventually dies trying to swim, which he had never done before, and following his acolyte into the water. And the final part of the book is our tracks from his writings, which are 4 stories, and those stories are very interesting stories to read. So it's, in a way, it's a commentary of the ivory tower, which back in 1920 was a real concept as far as academia was concerned. But it was at a time when, of course, cyber infrastructure didn't exist. And so his concept of this glass bead game you can take as almost a metaphor for computers. So I would commend the book to anyone who likes a good read. It's a very challenging book to read, but it's a very enlightening book to read. Any other questions? More dessert? Yes.
Really something just you touched on the social aspects, and this is something very interesting about the future where, if I understand you correctly, like there's a lot of investment outside of the country, and they're banking on less going on here, so that transition of power seems to be a very, in the context of competition and collaboration. I imagine that a lot of people get a little worried that giving away all this information, which is a good
Well,
thing on a global perspective, but more locally, it seems like a lot of people get a little nervous.
The reason I made that comment is when you consider open access at different levels, at the data level, at the metadata level, at the e-publication level, the problems are entirely different. So you can't take a normative approach and say that one approach is going to solve all the problems at those levels, because there are problems not only scaling problems as you go from data to publications, but there are also problems in scope to deal with such things as provenance, precedence, credit for impact, which is vital to granting tenure, reliability, authenticity. These are some of the scoping problems which I indicate are more social in nature than technological in nature for the most part.
Other questions? I'd like to thank Arden again. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.